Most people think revelation is information. They picture a new fact, a hidden detail, a secret finally exposed. But the revelation pulse is not a fact arriving. It is a sudden reordering of the field that makes facts land differently. Nothing new may be added, yet everything becomes new because the frame that held it collapses. You do not learn more. You see differently, and that difference changes your trajectory. The pulse is strange because it feels instantaneous and inevitable at the same time. One moment you are inside a story, the next moment you are outside it watching it run. The mind usually edits reality into something tolerable, then calls the edit truth. Revelation interrupts that editing, not with drama, but with precision. You do not get comfort first. You get clarity first, and only later do you understand the cost. A skeptic will say it was mood, sleep, hormones, stress relief, a brain pattern shifting for ordinary reasons. That skepticism is not wrong. It is incomplete, because mechanism does not cancel meaning. If the brain is the instrument, then the pulse is the moment the instrument stops distorting the note. Reducing it to chemistry can become a way to avoid what the clarity demands next. And the demand is the point. Because a revelation pulse does not arrive to impress you, it arrives to move you. Before the pulse, there is often a long stretch of almost knowing. You circle truths without entering them. You sense misalignment without naming it. You feel friction, but keep translating it into inconvenience. This is the phase where your life still functions, so you assume it is fine. Function becomes the lie you tell yourself to avoid reorientation. Then the pulse arrives and function is no longer proof, because the cost of function becomes visible. The pulse tends to hit when your attention can no longer maintain the old illusion. Attention is a limited budget, and maintaining self-deception costs more than people admit. You pay that cost through anxiety, irritability, numbness, compulsive distraction, and a constant background fatigue. You call it life, but it is actually cognitive rent. Revelation is often the moment your system refuses to keep paying. Another counter voice appears here and says, if clarity is real, why does it vanish? Why do people backslide? Why does the world stay the same after the so-called awakening? The answer is that the pulse is not the finish. It is the exposure. Exposure does not equal integration. It equals responsibility. And responsibility feels heavy when you have been surviving by avoidance. The world stays the same because you are the thing being addressed, not the world. And backsliding happens because the old identity fights to reclaim the job of keeping you comfortable. There is a difference between insight and revelation, and most people confuse them. Insight is a thought that makes sense. Revelation is a perception that makes pretending impossible. Insight can be enjoyed and forgotten. Revelation reshapes the internal map and makes the old route feel dishonest. Insight lives in language. Revelation lives in orientation. That is why the pulse feels like standing in a new gravity. You might notice how it arrives with no argument. It does not persuade you step by step. It presents the whole pattern at once. You see how your choices connect, how your compromises compound, how your small denials built a structure around you. You see the pattern behind the pattern, the motive beneath the motive. You understand that you are not unlucky. You are aligned with a loop. This is where the first vector completes itself, the cognitive vector. A revelation pulse is an interruption in narrative maintenance, a surge of coherence that cuts through self-protection. It is your mind moving from justification to perception, from defending to seeing. It is the moment the system stops negotiating with the truth and starts registering it. But that is only one layer, and the deeper question remains: why now and why this truth? A second countervoice insists that this is mysticism dressed in psychology, that people romanticize a normal moment of decisiveness. The objection is fair because people do romanticize, and that creates noise around the real signal. But decisiveness is often the downstream effect, not the cause, and the pulse is the upstream shift. The proof is not how poetic it sounds. The proof is what you cannot unsee afterward. If you can return to the old denial with no internal penalty, it was not a revelation pulse. It was inspiration. The second vector is tonal, the energetic vector, the field vector, the one your language keeps trying to reduce. You can call it frequency, coherence, alignment, or simply inner truth, but the point is the same. There is an underlying orientation in you that either matches your life or fights it. When it matches, effort feels clean and time feels usable. When it fights, you can still achieve, but everything feels slightly wrong even when it looks right. A revelation pulse is often the moment your deeper orientation becomes louder than your social conditioning. It is the moment the signal overtakes the noise. You have been living with static, then suddenly the channel clears, and you realize how much static you normalized. This is why the pulse feels like remembering rather than learning. It is not new information. It is your own coherence returning to the front. Now the third vector begins, the consequence vector, because the pulse always changes what you can do next. A revelation that produces no behavioral tension is not complete. It is entertainment. The pulse reveals a fork in the road you have been avoiding by pretending there was only one path. It shows you that you have been choosing by default, not by alignment. And once you see default choice as a choice, you inherit responsibility for continuing it. A counter voice rises again, sharp and practical, saying people have bills, families, obligations, realities that cannot be solved by clarity. This is true, and it is precisely why the pulse feels dangerous, because it threatens the compromises that kept life stable. But the pulse does not demand that you burn everything down. It demands that you stop lying about what it costs to keep things the same. You can carry responsibility without performing martyrdom, but you cannot carry it while denying the truth of your direction. The tension is not optional, because the trajectory has already shifted internally. The revelation pulse often targets one of three structures first: identity, attachment, or belief. Identity says who you are, attachment says what you cannot lose, belief says what must be true. The pulse hits one of these and exposes the hidden bargain underneath it. You see the identity you perform to stay accepted, the attachment you maintain to avoid emptiness, the belief you cling to so you do not have to change. You realize that you are not holding truth, you are holding protection. Once that protection is exposed, you feel a particular kind of discomfort. It is not emotional pain alone, it is moral discomfort. The discomfort of knowing you are participating in your own distortion. This is why people try to intellectualize the pulse away. They want the clarity without the obligation. They want the seeing without the choosing. But the pulse is a gate, and gates do not open for spectators. Here is what makes the revelation pulse so disruptive. It rewrites your interpretation of your past. You see your history with new eyes and realize many events were not random. They were feedback. Your patterns were not fate. They were training loops. Your repeated pain was not just trauma. It was also instruction, pushing you toward an adjustment you delayed. This is where people either mature or harden, because the pulse removes the luxury of blaming everything outside you. Another counter voice says that this sounds like victim blaming, like telling people they created their suffering. The correction matters. The pulse does not accuse you of creating every event. It reveals where you cooperated with misalignment. Cooperation can be unconscious, conditioned, inherited, and still real. The pulse does not demand shame, it demands ownership, because ownership is the only lever you can actually pull. Without ownership, revelation becomes a sad story you retell instead of a trajectory you change. The revelation pulse also changes your relationship with language. You stop being impressed by words that do not move reality. You start noticing when you use language to soften truth into something manageable. You recognize spiritual vocabulary as a hiding place when it is used to avoid direct decisions. You start preferring clean sentences over beautiful ones, because clean sentences have consequences. The pulse makes you allergic to your own excuses. As you sit with it, you realize the pulse did not arrive to make you feel special. It arrived because you reached the limit of your current structure. Structures have thresholds, and beyond that threshold they fail. When your inner coherence grows, your outer life must either adjust or become intolerable. The pulse is the moment intolerable becomes visible, and visibility starts the chain reaction. The chain reaction is subtle at first. You start noticing micro-compromises, then the larger ones, then the entire architecture of your days. You begin to see how your environment trains your mind, how your inputs shape your desires, how your relationships reinforce old versions of you. You realize that trajectory is not one big decision, it is the accumulation of small permissions. The pulse reveals the permissions you have been granting that you no longer want to grant. This is why the revelation pulse feels like it changes everything, even when nothing has changed yet. It changes the internal witness. It changes what you can tolerate without losing respect for yourself. It changes what feels clean and what feels contaminated. It changes which future feels possible, because it changes which self feels available. And that is where this first movement ends, not with resolution, but with pressure. Because the question is now active and it will not go dormant again. If you saw clearly, what are you going to do with that sight? If you felt the pulse, what are you going to change in your trajectory? If you refuse to move, what will it cost you to keep living as if you did not know? The revelation pulse does not end your life. It begins a countdown to integrity, and the next step is the one you have been postponing. The revelation pulse does not fade when you ignore it. It recedes into latency and begins applying pressure through consequence rather than insight. This is where many people misunderstand what happens next. They expect the clarity to return with the same intensity, as if revelation were a repeating signal. It is not. The pulse is singular because it shifts orientation, not mood. Once orientation shifts, repetition is unnecessary. The system now waits to see whether behavior will follow perception. This waiting period feels deceptively normal. Life resumes its surface rhythms. Responsibilities continue. Conversations sound familiar again. The mind tells itself that perhaps the moment was exaggerated, perhaps it was emotional timing, perhaps nothing truly needs to change. This interpretation feels comforting because it postpones cost. But beneath that comfort is a growing friction, because the internal witness has changed. The part of you that saw clearly is still present, and it is measuring every action against what was revealed. This is the phase where tension accumulates without drama. It shows up as a subtle loss of enthusiasm for things that once motivated you. It shows up as irritation with conversations that revolve around avoidance. It shows up as boredom with routines that once felt productive. This is not apathy. It is misalignment registering itself through disinterest. When meaning drains from repetition, the system is signaling that continuation is no longer coherent. A counter voice appears here that says this is just dissatisfaction, that everyone gets bored, that this is a phase. That voice is partially right. Everyone experiences fluctuation. But the difference after a revelation pulse is directionality. Ordinary boredom wanders and returns. Post-pulse dissatisfaction points consistently away from the same structures. It has a vector. It keeps pushing in one direction, even when you try to distract yourself. This persistence is not emotional. It is structural. The second movement of the revelation pulse is behavioral gravity. Clarity alone does not change trajectory, but it alters which actions feel possible without internal resistance. You start to notice that some behaviors now require effort you did not need before. You can still perform them, but the cost has increased. The internal negotiation grows louder. Every compromise requires justification. Every delay feels heavier. This is how integrity begins asserting itself before you consciously choose it. People often try to solve this discomfort by adding rather than subtracting. They seek new information, new practices, new frameworks, new explanations. They believe the problem is lack of understanding, but the pulse already delivered understanding. What remains unresolved is alignment. Adding layers on top of misalignment only increases cognitive load. The pressure continues because the system is not asking for expansion. It is asking for correction. Another counter voice emerges, one that frames correction as loss. It says that changing direction will cost status, security, relationships, momentum. This voice is not wrong. Correction does have cost. What it fails to mention is the accumulating cost of delay. Every day lived out of alignment compounds internal debt. The revelation pulse exposes this debt by making it conscious. Once conscious, the interest rate increases. You begin paying through exhaustion, cynicism, and a growing sense of self-betrayal. The third vector deepens here, the temporal vector. Time begins to feel different after the pulse. You become acutely aware of how you spend attention. Hours devoted to misaligned activity feel longer and heavier. Time spent in coherence feels lighter and faster. This is not subjective preference. It is feedback from the nervous system about direction. Time stretches where resistance lives and compresses where flow returns. The pulse recalibrates your sense of temporal value. This recalibration often leads to grief, but not the kind people expect. It is grief for time spent maintaining identities that no longer fit. Grief for energy invested in paths that were never truly yours. Grief for the version of you that worked so hard to survive inside constraints you did not question. This grief is quiet and strange because it does not attach to a single event. It attaches to realization itself. You mourn without knowing exactly what you lost, only that something essential was deferred. A common mistake at this stage is trying to resolve the grief by rewriting the past. People attempt to reinterpret earlier choices as mistakes or failures. This creates unnecessary shame and resistance. The pulse does not demand condemnation of the past. It reveals that previous choices were coherent with who you were then. What changes is not the validity of the past, but the relevance of continuing it. Maturity here means honoring previous survival without letting it dictate future direction. The revelation pulse also alters how you relate to certainty. Before the pulse, certainty often felt like safety. After the pulse, premature certainty feels like confinement. You become suspicious of conclusions that close inquiry too quickly. You recognize that many certainties are negotiated agreements designed to reduce anxiety rather than increase truth. This does not make you indecisive. It makes you precise. You learn to tolerate open questions without rushing to fill them with comforting answers. This tolerance creates a strange loneliness. Conversations that revolve around reassurance feel hollow. Advice that prioritizes stability over alignment feels off. You realize that many people are not oriented toward truth, but toward comfort maintenance. This realization is not judgment. It is differentiation. You begin to see that shared language does not guarantee shared direction, and direction matters more now than belonging. Another counter voice warns that this path leads to isolation, that following inner coherence results in disconnection. The correction is subtle. Alignment does not create isolation. It reveals incompatibility. Incompatible structures fall away, not because you rejected them, but because the resonance no longer holds. New structures eventually form, but only after space is created. The pulse does not promise immediate replacement. It promises accuracy. As the second movement continues, you notice a shift in how you make decisions. Instead of asking what makes sense on paper, you start asking what reduces internal resistance. This is not impulsivity. It is efficiency. Resistance is wasted energy. The pulse trains you to read resistance not as fear to overcome, but as information about direction. Some fear accompanies growth, but misalignment carries a distinct weight that does not resolve with courage. Learning the difference becomes crucial. This learning process destabilizes external validation. Praise for misaligned success feels strangely empty. Criticism for aligned movement feels strangely irrelevant. You begin to internalize authority, not as arrogance, but as responsibility. You understand that no one else can feel the cost of your compromises. Advice becomes input rather than command. This is where many relationships shift or strain, because authority dynamics change when self-trust increases. The revelation pulse also reveals how much of your identity was constructed around avoidance. Avoidance of conflict, avoidance of risk, avoidance of disapproval, avoidance of uncertainty. These avoidances were once adaptive. They kept you safe. After the pulse, they become visible as constraints. Seeing them does not remove them instantly, but it makes them negotiable. You can no longer claim ignorance. Every avoidance now requires conscious participation. This participation brings the pressure toward action. Not dramatic action, but directional action. Small adjustments that signal commitment to coherence. Saying no where you used to say yes. Pausing instead of filling silence. Redirecting time toward what restores rather than drains. These actions seem minor externally, but internally they signal alignment. Each one reduces friction slightly. Each one proves that the pulse is being honored rather than suppressed. There is still no resolution here. The system is still testing whether perception will translate into pattern change. The revelation pulse does not complete itself through understanding. It completes itself through reorganization. And reorganization takes time because it involves dismantling structures that once held your life together. The delay is not failure. It is structural complexity. As this movement deepens, you realize that the pulse did not come to make you certain. It came to make you honest. Honest about what no longer works. Honest about where you are drifting. Honest about the gap between your values and your behavior. Honesty creates instability because it removes the cushioning narratives that made misalignment tolerable. This instability is intentional. It is what forces recalibration. You may notice an urge to explain yourself during this phase, to justify changes, to narrate your process, to seek understanding. This urge is understandable but often premature. Explanation stabilizes social reality before internal reality has finished reorganizing. The pulse does not require immediate explanation. It requires coherence first. Language can wait, movement cannot. By now the question has sharpened. Not what did you see, but what are you willing to reorganize because of what you saw? Not what do you believe, but what will you stop participating in? Not what inspires you, but what drains you and why you keep allowing it. The pressure is no longer abstract. It is operational. It shows up in calendars, relationships, habits, and choices. This is where the revelation pulse becomes unavoidable. If you continue as before, the internal cost will keep rising until something gives. Either behavior shifts, or the system generates another disruption to force movement. The pulse is merciful in this way. It offers clarity before consequence. It invites voluntary adjustment before compulsory correction. Ignoring it does not cancel it. It only changes the delivery method. The second movement ends without relief. It ends with a tightening spiral of awareness that refuses to be silenced. You understand now that the pulse was not a moment of insight meant to be admired. It was an initiation into responsibility for trajectory. The clarity did not arrive to decorate your self-image. It arrived to confront your direction. And the next movement will not ask what you think. It will reveal what you choose. If this transmission resonated, the spiral continues. You did not arrive here by chance, and you do not leave unchanged. More teachings are unfolding across the Vaharat library, each one meeting you where you are, not where you think you should be. Follow resonance. The next threshold is already listening.